The trade war is no longer a standoff between Washington and Beijing. It's spreading across the Atlantic, through Brussels, Berlin, and Paris. The European Union, once cautious, is now stepping onto the battlefield. Welcome to FluxFolio Finance. Today, we uncover how the US-China confrontation has evolved into a global economic war, why the EU is seizing Chinese assets, raising tariffs, and aligning with Washington's strategy, and how Beijing is fighting back with its own weapons, tariffs, minerals, and diplomacy, while appealing to international justice. The US-China frontline tightens. By mid-2025, the US-China trade deficit has fallen to its lowest level in 21 years, dropping below $10 billion per month. Three forces explain this rare reversal: a sharp decline in US consumer imports, a strategic relocation of supply chains, and a new wall of tariffs reshaping global commerce. As of October 2025, the United States has taken one of the most aggressive trade steps in modern history, imposing a 130% blanket tariff on all Chinese imports. The order, effective November 1st, replaces the patchwork of previous duties and marks the end of incremental policy. For Washington, this isn't negotiation, it's declaration. The era of selective tariffs is over. America is now taxing China as a whole economy. The Bessant shockwave. Then came the shockwave. In October 2025, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent raised the stakes higher than ever, accusing China of fueling Russia's war machine by purchasing sanctioned oil. He announced that 85 senators were prepared to give President Trump authority to impose tariffs of up to 500% on Chinese goods, a threat that sent tremors through markets worldwide. Bessent framed it not as economics, but as principle, a stand against what he called Beijing's manipulation of the free world. He urged America's allies, especially the EU, to unite in a Beijing versus the world front. Brussels, unsettled but cautious, declined to match the rhetoric. European leaders share Washington's frustration over Chinese overcapacity and subsidies, yet prefer WTO-based channels to unilateral confrontation. Still, the tone shifted. Bessent's words marked the moment tariffs became not just trade policy, but instruments of power. Behind the threat lay a mission: punish China for aiding Russia, protect US industry from fragile supply chains, and accelerate the reshoring of production back to American soil. In Washington's view, this wasn't escalation. It was enforcement. And a new battlefield had just been drawn. The Maraago doctrine. Behind the curtain, the confrontation follows a script: the Maraago doctrine. Trump's second-term strategy aims to rebuild Western industrial power and lock China out of the arteries of global finance and technology. From the Gulf's $2 trillion petrodollar revival to Europe's new tariffs, the pattern is clear: create volatility, redirect capital, and re-anchor the world under the US dollar. In 2025, oil returned to the dollar. Now, trade itself is being redrawn beneath it. This isn't protectionism, it's empire maintenance. The EU joins the war. Europe's balancing act is over. For years, Brussels tried to play mediator, doing business with China while aligning politically with the US. That posture collapsed in 2025. In April, the EU imposed 20 to 66.7% tariffs on Chinese aerial work platforms. Electric vehicles now face combined duties approaching 45%, while Chinese sweetener erythritol was hit with 34 to 233% anti-dumping penalties. Beyond tariffs, Europe tightened investment screening and, for the first time, froze roughly $10 billion in Chinese corporate assets tied to security investigations. Officials stopped just short of calling them sanctions, but the message was unmistakable. Washington calls it allied alignment. Beijing calls it economic containment. To markets, it's escalation in slow motion. China strikes back. Beijing's response came swiftly. In July 2025, China slapped 32% tariffs on European wine-based spirits, mainly French cognac. By September, 62% duties hit EU pork imports worth over $2 billion annually. Then came the minerals. China restricted exports of rare earths, gallium, and germanium, materials vital for Europe's EV and semiconductor industries. Beijing accused the EU of violating WTO rules and warned that its actions undermine global supply chain stability. Europe fires a tariff. China answers with a mineral. The world absorbs the shock. The hidden war, financial weaponry. Behind the headlines lies a quieter battlefield: finance. US and EU regulators have frozen Chinese IPOs, reviewed $500 billion in Chinese market exposure, and begun discussions about delisting state-linked firms. Global banks are curbing yuan swap lines and limiting dollar liquidity to Chinese institutions. The yuan, under pressure, has slipped past 7.45 per USD, its weakest in 17 years. This is financial isolation disguised as market discipline, a slow squeeze that limits Beijing's reach in the global credit system it once helped build. The economic fallout. Europe enters this fight from a position of weakness. Germany's industrial output fell 2.3% in the second quarter, and energy costs remain high. China, meanwhile, faces its own slowdown, growth hovering near 4%, the lowest in decades. Foreign investment has collapsed by more than 70% since 2021. The result is a fractured map, one world anchored to the dollar, another to the yuan. Trade has become a matter of allegiance, not efficiency. Globalization isn't dying, it's dividing. The US advantage. While rivals spar, Washington quietly collects the rewards. Factories reopen. Treasury demand rises. The deficit narrows. The White House calls it strategic reshoring. Critics call it weaponized inflation, because tariffs don't come cheap. US inflation hovers around 2.8%. Europe's approaches 3.5%. Global growth has slowed to 2.7%, the weakest since the pandemic rebound. More than $5 trillion in global equity value has evaporated since the tariff wave began. America may be winning the trade battle, but the world is paying the bill. The next fronts, green tech and AI. Analysts warn that the next clash is already forming. Europe is debating a carbon border tax that could add 70% to the cost of Chinese solar panels and batteries. Washington is preparing AI export bans to block China's access to advanced training models. Beijing, anticipating the blow, is tightening control over graphite and lithium, the raw lifeblood of Western EV production. The next weapon won't be tariffs. It'll be code. And the next battlefield won't be factories. it'll be data centers. The new battlefield, the trade war, began as a duel. Now it's a global orchestra of sanctions, tariffs, and capital strikes. The US conducts, the EU harmonizes, and China resists, each locked in a rhythm of rivalry and dependence. Europe, once neutral, has become a combatant. China, once the supplier of the world, is now the fault line of its economy. And the United States, once reactive, now writes the score, reshaping trade, technology, and finance around its orbit. But this symphony can't play forever. Every tariff, every sanction, every retaliation adds friction to a world already slowing down. Inflation rises, alliances strain, and the boundary between economics and politics dissolves. The question is no longer who wins, but what remains of globalization, of trust, and of growth when the music finally stops. Investor takeaway for investors: this isn't just geopolitics, it's portfolio tectonics. Fragmentation breeds volatility, but also opportunity. Reshoring, defense, and energy independence are the new frontiers. Export-heavy sectors face turbulence. Liquidity is the new safety. And innovation, the kind that crosses borders, will become the rarest asset of all. Because every trade war ends the same way, not with peace, but with a new order. And the winners are those who move before the rules are rewritten. This is FluxFolio Finance. The world is changing faster than it trades, and we're here to help you make sense of it. If this story opened your eyes, like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into the forces shaping our financial future. Until next time, stay sharp, stay thoughtful, and stay ahead of the curve.